Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cottrell, Rachel Cottrell, and Keaton Dodd.
I'd like to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Over the Hump podcast, and I'm Keaton Dodd and have the opportunity to bring to y'all a guest that we're probably all very curious to get to know and looking forward to have the opportunity to meet, Mr. Paul Maulsby. And so whether you knew him previously there from his involvement at Texas A&M or through Gene Source, or maybe somebody that's judged your show before, I think tremendous respect for Maulsby as a cattle evaluator, as a leader of people, and so we're looking forward to what he can do for the ABBA and looking forward to having a nice conversation with Paul, and so we'll go ahead and get right into it. I'd like to welcome everybody back to another episode of Over the Hump, and today an absolutely special guest. We've been really excited to get the opportunity to visit with Paul, and I know the entire Brahman breed has wanted to know him better, but are more just very, very excited to have him on our team, and a very talented individual that I think is going to be great for the Brahman breed moving forward. And so, Paul, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your history, and we'll just kind of dive in from that direction.
Thank you very much. I've equally been excited to visit with you guys, but more importantly to the membership. And I've been in my position as the executive vice president of the ABBA for about 2.5 weeks. And it's been really, really exciting to visit with people. And I'm looking forward to doing that as I continue to go around the nation and the globe representing Brahman cattle. Again, my name is Paul Maulsby. I come from a ranching family that derived in New Mexico, big open country. My family made a living off of commercial cows, where we ran about 800 head of females. I was like a lot of kids, grew up in 4-H, FFA, breed associations, showing cattle in 4-H and FFA and breed associations, but also really recognizing what it took to make a living. My dad made sure I was aware of that. I lived in an area where I was really removed and isolated from a general population. So if you ever wondered who lived down the end of those roads out in the middle of nowhere as you were driving to go skiing or go to some really relaxing place in New Mexico, it was me. And I always knew that I wanted to be involved in the industry in some way, shape, or form. And as I went to college at Oklahoma State University for my undergraduate, I was asked kind of what my goal was or what I wanted to do by a gentleman named Dr. Bob Kropp. And I told him that I wanted to be an executive of a breed association. So even though my journey has taken twists and turns, it has always been directed towards this goal, knowing that maybe that may not happen, but with God's grace, I think I've been given the opportunity. So I feel, as I've sat here for 2 weeks, that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I'm very excited about that. As I mentioned, my undergrad was at Oklahoma State in animal science, and I had a business minor, and I had a marketing focus. And I judged while I was there. And then I had the opportunity right out of school. One of the first things I did, I worked for a racehorse publication called Speed Horse. I was newly married. I'd always been involved kind of in the horse industry somewhat and worked for a bloodstock agent with quarter horse racing horses when I was in college. But I really set the foundation of understanding publications and networking with people and the importance of that. After that, my wife and I worked with my father-in-law where we had purebred Simmental cattle. We also ran a lot of stocker cattle on wheat pasture. So that gave me a big introduction into that sector of the world. We were able to grow the purebred program while I was there. We exhibited national champions, had our own production sales. So I got the ground level work of trying to figure out how to run a production sale. That was with my father-in-law, Ayers Farms. And then after that, I got a call from a gentleman that's been very pivotal in my career, is Dr. Chris Skaggs. And he said, we are needing somebody to come to Texas A&M University, and these are our goals, and we want you to run the beef center and try to accomplish those things. And while you're at it, you can work on your graduate school. So I was 10 years removed from going to class, but I dove off in it, had two young daughters, and started at the task of getting the goals of running the beef center. And there was a Brahman herd in place, and I had had some exposure to Brahman cattle, but I think that was the first time, other than running commercial Brahman steers that my family ran in the summers, where I got to work with cow herd. And I really enjoyed it, and I got to see the magnitude and how they impact this part of the world. And I kind of started falling in love with them, I guess you could say, when I saw the cattle. So while I was at Texas A&M for about 13 years, I developed the tasks that were at hand in terms of developing the beef programs, and also found this love of mine, and that was teaching. And as I worked on my graduate work classes and worked with different programs, and people from all over the world came through the beef center, and I was able to communicate with what we were doing, and some properties of the American beef cattle industry. I just really, really fell in love with teaching and in an extension type format with people. And I was able and given the opportunity to teach classes as a graduate assistant, but also develop my own sales and marketing class here at A&M. At that time, I know I'm kind of going through all of this, going through all my little journey. I had two daughters, and unfortunately found myself being a single father of these two girls that are just super special to me. And we utilized, or I did, showing cattle as a format for me to teach them a lot of things. And like showing or not, I think there's so many lessons to learn in anything, winning and losing, and people and their dynamics of people and all those things. And so we were able to do that. And at that time, I started working for Showbox magazine and working with the Texas Junior Livestock Association. So loved the youth-based entity of that, loved the publications. That was a really neat experience in my journey. After that, I worked and started developing my own consulting firm, because I was getting calls and questions about everything in terms of marketing or how to feed or what do I select. And I thought, well, I'm going to turn this into a business. And so I've always consulted on all spectrums of commercial, purebred, youth projects, or even the marketing of how I develop platforms to get the message out about my program, and worked, because of my background with publications, social media, websites, things like that. I was able to facilitate that. After that, I was approached by a gentleman that has an investment company, and he has commercial cattle, and we developed some purebred cattle, and we started exporting beef to internationally. And so that was where I've been the last 5 years, along with working for a semen distribution company called Gene Source. A good friend of mine, Dave and Becky Allen, own it. I really, really enjoyed getting the opportunity to work with all sectors and all breeds, and having communication with people from all over the United States. And so I think that was a great asset to me. And then, not looking for a job, I've been pretty content with where I'm at, and the evolution kind of comes along. I have this fabulous grandson. I have a great son-in-law, and he's involved in the cattle industry as well with my daughter. And I was approached that there was an opportunity at the American Brahman Association, and I thought a lot about it. I talked to my daughters about it, and those are the only people I talked to about it. Dr. Skaggs had mentioned it to me. I prayed a lot, and I just figured that everything had kind of led me to this place, and that if the door opened, I was going to knock on it. And if it presented itself, I was going to walk through, and here I am today. So that's kind of my journey, my story.
Anytime I hear people talk about Beef Center in Texas A&M, I just kind of light up and smile and think about how strong that program was when you were involved in it, how successful the Beef Center was. And in the old Simmental days, I think, is it She's a Dandy? Is that the right cow that keeps popping back up? But tell us a little bit, like, y'all hauled an open string, and A&M as a university was so much more involved on the seed stock and production side of things when you were there. And so I guess just talk through those days just a little bit.
Sure. Keaton, we wanted it to be a hub for students to come to, not only just purebred, but everybody, and wanted there to be a certain pride. I mean, that's something I guess our university is not lacking in is pride, but we wanted it to be that when we taught about cattle or we taught about the purebred industry, that we were current and on trend. And with the help of donations, that I worked aggressively with my connections around the United States and with the goals of a lot of the people on faculty and the alumnus of A&M, we did start some cattle. And actually we had a national champion bull. We had champion bull at Kansas City. We had reserve champion bull that we raised out of a donor cow that was donated that was reserve at Louisville. We topped the sale with a heifer that year at Louisville as well. And I tried to make that to where it was a teaching experience, and added layer to that as we started having production sales as well, and that every segment of it we were able to teach. And during that time, I was pretty involved with using them as a teaching unit for judging programs and for all of the sectors of the industry here while we were at A&M, and also just providing a commercial cow herd too that was important for people to learn from.
Yeah, that's like I said, I have so many fond memories, and you did so much not only just for the Beef Center, but the judging program. You've impacted some. I can still think back to the judging contest class at Houston. There was a set of Simmental heifers, and there was a red baldy and a black baldy female that were really, really elite. I think they were both owned by your daughters, and so that's kind of cool. I guess talking about your involvement at the Beef Center, like I said, you've been so influential in so many people's lives. What are some of the really successful students that have come through your program that are now out, and you just get to kind of smile with pride and know that you had part of kind of their, I guess, formation?
I think in my journey, I've always recognized that if I could be impactful in any way and shine a light of positivity, I know everything doesn't work out perfectly, but I had this opportunity to interact with so many students and their families and kind of their journey. And I thought, always thought, and still do to this day, that if I can at least teach or share my ups and downs, that maybe it would be helpful. But I kept track. I had a lot of student workers that worked for me on a daily basis. Over the 13-year period I was there, I had 120 student workers, and many of them have gone on to do big things. And some of them not in the cattle industry, but a lot of them have gone on to be coaches at judging programs like Dr. Blake Bloomberg. There's a gentleman named Matt Leo that I was very close with that owns a commodities company in California and also judges shows throughout the United States. I've had Dr. Chris Cassidy, who is from the Midwest, that also worked at the university system, Jake Frankie, Kelton Mason. I could go on with students that have become judging coaches or in their respective industries have gone on to be professors, PhDs, heads of departments. And so just to think, obviously they were talented people on their own, but to think that hopefully I helped give them just a little insight along the way has been probably one of my greatest achievements.
Yeah, like I said, you may not have had everything to do with their kind of success, but you were dang sure an integral part in a lot of kids' lives early on when in their younger 20s. And so I appreciate it myself because I know you had an impact on me, but I know those people would probably all speak and say the same. You mentioned your daughters, and I think anybody that has been around you knows you, Paul, knows you love your family. You're a great father. And so what are your girls up to nowadays? What keeps them busy? I know you'd mentioned your son-in-law's got their Scamardo Brangus, but what do they have going on in their lives?
Yes, my daughters are very integral part of my world, as I think everybody's families are. But I've been given this gift of having these two kids, and that I had a responsibility to impact their lives. And so my oldest daughter works for a company called MWI as a price analyst. They are directly involved with pharmaceuticals for large and small animals. She is married to my son-in-law, Andrew Scamardo, and they have SB Brangus Scamardo Brangus, and it's been fun to watch them develop that program aggressively, and to also just watch how they have had growing pains in trying to survive in this business of having registered cattle, of having show cattle, of having commercial bull sales, of adding layers of feeding cattle in a feed yard scenario and all those things. And I admire my son-in-law and my daughter in terms of making a living at this business, even when it's tough. My youngest daughter, Sydney, works as an enologist, and she works in the wine industry and a distributor with spirits and things like that, where they do wine and different alcohols to different companies. And so she's been very involved in the wine industry and the growing and marketing of that. So she's in a good place as well. And I have a grandson named Ace, and I never thought I was going to be that grandparent that just had to see pictures of him every day and go on. But I'm that guy. I will tell you, that kid lights up my day every day. So I'm excited for the future of other grandchildren and just to always impact my kids in a way that I see being positive.
That is awesome. Like I said, great family, man. I've got to know Andrew just a little bit over the years and seen that program grow too. And they've done a fantastic job of developing and maintaining Scamardo Brangus. Like you talked about, it's not easy being a young couple making a purebred seed stock entity survive, but they're doing a really good job. We had kind of a pivot point in our conversation. You judge shows all over the country. I judge lots of shows, and we know the challenge that comes with laying out kind of a lineup and placing classes in large shows. But Houston in itself, synonymous with Brahman, and that show may be as big of a bear as any show across the globe. And so, as a guy who's judged Houston, talk us through just kind of the moments when you step in the arena and you look at a class of 75 young Brahman heifer calves, and just how challenging that show is and how much fun you had doing it.
Well, I will tell you that when I was showing cattle, Simmentals, and kind of going all over the United States, showing them, Houston was always one of the places we went. And just watching the sheer size of what that show represented and then the culture that it brought in from all over the globe, it was just spectacular and impressive. And I think that was impactful upon me at that time. And always thought, man, wouldn't it be great to judge that show someday? And I definitely got the opportunity and was blessed to have it to do it. But I think that one of the things about judging shows, and I love doing it and sharing my thoughts, it's definitely takes a little more thought in terms of walking in that arena, especially one that size. And you want to be efficient and you want to be thorough and you want to be accurate, but also at a pace, if it allows, to not drag it out. And I think you also have a responsibility to keep the flow very positive and your remarks positive. And at the end of the day, you got to be a little thick skinned because you got to pick one. And sometimes classes don't lay out exactly like you want them to lay out. And sometimes you have the depth that basically six of them could have been champions. But at the end of the day, you've got to pick one. And so I think that people think it's easy. People think there's a bias. There's obviously, it's just an opinion at the end of the day. And it may be a type and kind. And if you can kind of keep that consistency all the way throughout, I think is important as we direct those comments directly to judging Houston. It is overwhelming when 75 head of them come at you that first class, but you kind of take a deep breath and just kind of work your way through it and try to be thorough and get you some continuity in how you're going to build the show going through those few days. And I'm not going to lie, I probably worked a little more on the treadmill and did a little more of those because it gets a little tiring out there. But when you're tired, you have to stay focused all the way through.
That's what we just talking to Brandon after he finished, and you don't realize it took him like a week and a half, 2 weeks before his body was even feeling back to normal. On his feet the whole time.
I relate to him on that, but it was exciting and fun, and I felt good when it was done. And I'm sure there were people throwing darts at me that he didn't know what he was doing or this or that, and that's fair. That's their prerogative. But I felt good about what I did, and I felt like I described the cattle how I was seeing them. And at the end of the day, that's all I could ask.
Well, that was the year, I believe, that Boom Shakalaka was champion female. So obviously we were very happy with the job. And if you wanted to argue that if they were successful, that may have been as productive of a cow after a championship. So like I said, we were stoked. I've heard this before, and I don't know if it's fact, but you'd probably be the best person to answer this question or look into it and see if you could figure it out. But I've heard that the Houston Brahman Open Show is the largest single breed open show in the country. I'm not positive, but just thinking about it, that sounds right.
Well, I would have to say yes. And I, over the last 30 years, have probably been to most shows and multiple breeds. And there's obviously some very large ones, but of that size and scope, and then The other thing is just the consistency of that number is impressive. It's not just like one year because it was some event was with it. It is like every year it's that size. And then the ranches that come are just, I love how you see them promoting their program. And I think that's the biggest thing. As a judge, I can only sort what's brought to me that day. I don't know their pedigrees, their statistical profiles, any of those things. So you're visually assessing them, but sometimes the best cow may be fourth place. So at the back, and as you're back in promoting your cattle, I think that's the biggest thing to think about the show. The charge and rush of winning is amazing. The charge and rush of selecting one is amazing. But at the end of the day, I think that you have to keep it in a perspective that you're there to promote your program and that different types of cattle are needed for different directions of programs. And so I think that's important to keep in a perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Probably my favorite thing about Brahman and the thing that I tell people and advocate for when talk about the separation of showing from real world production, but because of the international element that Houston brings to the table, there's legitimate, serious business transacted there during Houston. Cattle are trading hands. Seed stock are getting marketed all over the globe. And so I think that's one of the last few shows where it's truly marketing seed stock through their exhibition in the show ring. I guess, do you agree with that or kind of see it?
Oh, and I think historically, Keaton, in the past with other breeds, that did happen, but there is no question. And I think that the Brahman breeders as a whole, they should be extremely proud and recognize how challenging that is. And I think that yes, there is no question that in terms of not only internationally but domestically, that there are cattle that are moving hands, and not only in semen and embryos, but actually live cattle, and it not just being big breeders, but there's small breeders that have the capability of doing that as well. So, I mean, I think that it's truly impressive, and it's one of those things. The only thing I can kind of give you an analogy is I think some of us that have shown in Texas, you just realize as a junior entity of it, just how many shows, the size, the quality of them, and there's so many states that don't have those opportunities. I think the same thing's a little bit for the Brahman breed is sometimes I don't know that when you sit back and realize just what an opportunity there is there, and how successful people are, I think is to be commended.
No, absolutely. I think that's something that us as Brahman people need to take a step back and just be thankful and appreciative of that international market, because I think so many breeds would kill for the opportunity to sell cattle all over the globe like we have the potential to do. And so we've got to take care of that and treasure that and really be appreciative, because that's a big, big help when it comes to kind of keeping things afloat.
Most definitely.
As we kind of shift and just start talking about ABBA, your new role and position, I guess lead us into what may be some of the first problems or adventures that you're going to try and tackle, and what are your priorities as you kind of lead ABBA moving forward?
Well, that's an awfully big question, but definitely I think there are some goals and a vision. And I think first and foremost, I want to emphasize that there is a constitution and there are rules and bylaws in place, and it is my job to facilitate the actions of what I choose or suggest to facilitate within those realms. Also, there's a governing body of a board and executive officers, and I really recognize the importance of that. So I think that's the platform in which that has to be there. I think when I look at the vision of what I have or what I would like to make happen is I think that there are places both domestically and internationally, and I know that there's people or sectors that maybe think one's more important than the other. And I think the one word that I'm going to say with everything I do is balance. I think I try to do balance in my life, balance in terms of how I respond to things. And I think there has to be balance in what we do. And I think if we talk about ourselves domestically, the beef industry has changed just a little bit, and it's a more competitive world with other breeds advancing, and especially as you look at Bos Indicus type cattle. I think there's no question that we are a component that created all of those. And I think that we need to make sure that we position ourselves and continue to position ourselves as Brahman breeders, that we are part of the equation and the puzzle of F1 cows and cattle that adapt to environments and cattle that have extreme performance as we kind of concentrate on more red meat yield type entities. And so the commercial component is super important to me. I think also with research and reaching out to academia in terms of spreading our message. And I kind of had this thought is that oftentimes in teaching a class about breeds, is that the stereotypes that we're teaching people sometimes are based on data that came from 40 years ago. And all the breeds have changed. And I think the stereotypes no longer are there. And so the stereotypes that we have from Brahman have really are not there. And so I want to make sure that maybe I can do some outreach in terms of a lecture series about the positivity of Brahmins, and then also reach out from a research standpoint. And then no question, we've talked about the international component that we saw there with the shows, and then just how people come to us to utilize our genetics, and that composition's changed just a little bit, but I want to make sure that we continue to facilitate that and facilitate the ABBA in a positive light internationally as well. I think when you start talking about the association itself, obviously our job is to do transfers, and our job is, like I mentioned in the opening of the podcast, and to do registrations, to facilitate DNA, which I know is something that it's a little daunting to think about. It's a little daunting to facilitate, and we're in the middle of our 5-year plan, but it's inevitable. And every breed is the same as we continue to have integrity of our genetics, but also just DNA profiles of things. It's just inevitable in the beef industry, and especially the purebred beef industry today. So I think that's a component. So I kind of think about this at the end of the day when I talk about balance as kind of a bunch of pillars holding up the association. And if one of them is shorter than the other or doesn't have the same equality in terms of holding the structure of this up, then we're falling short. And so I think when you think of pillars of the commercial industry and research, and when you think about the junior youth and show industry as one, and we think about the technology of DNA as one, and then also membership and registrations as one, and then also our communication. And if we do all of those things, I think we will hold us up in a balanced way, and I think we will thrive. And I think that's a platform that I have, and I want to facilitate a structure and a team of people here in the office that help facilitate those things.
Brahman beef is the next big thing in the meat industry. Known for its great flavor along with heart-healthy benefits, Brahman beef is taking the country by storm. Brahman Country Beef features great-tasting, heart-healthy beef raised by BRC Ranch. We ship nationwide, with everything from premium steaks to briskets, ground beef, and even hard-to-find cuts like tri-tip, picanha, oxtails, and the elusive Brahman hump. Visit BrahmanCountryBeef.com and start your order today.
You talked about lots of things. The hard part about this podcast is when you say something, remembering to come back to it. And so I try to write things down as you're talking so I don't forget. But one thing that stuck out to me was a 3-word phrase. You said DNA is inevitable. And we just did a DNA podcast a couple weeks or last week, or maybe that was even this week, days run together, but talking about how important all of that is and why it's inevitable. Most of our listeners are Brahmin folks, but can you explain to them that other breed associations are 5 to 15 years ahead of us just from a DNA and a DNA collection standpoint?
Well, and I think, Keaton, here's one of the things is that when I say that, I don't mean specifically, it's just the general dynamics of the purebred industry.
Yeah, just the beef industry.
It's just the beef industry. And I think that one thing to recognize within that is make sure you read the rules. It doesn't mean that every animal that has to have DNA, but those that are representing specific genetics of purebred cattle, I think it is inevitable in all breeds. And I think it's great that it's facilitated within our breed and we're in the middle of this 5-year journey. But I know it's a challenge, both when you're out there collecting the information, and I know that it is kind of evolving and changing, but we have to keep in stride with it for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably a large misconception amongst breeders in all breeds across the purebred sector, I guess not a misconception, but a thing that I think people of breeds have the hardest time or a hard time getting along and understanding is what is the actual, you as an executive, what is the actual responsibility of a breed association to its members at its core?
Well, I think I've kind of touched upon it, and I'm going to learn along the way. I think we're always here to learn and listen, and I'm doing a lot of that in listening to people and seeing their viewpoints. But at the end of the day, my job is to facilitate, to give the breeders tools to be successful at what they do. And that doesn't mean that I'm the one marketing their cattle, and it doesn't mean that I'm the one judging their cattle or setting the standard. I do think that my job is to make sure that they can register their cattle, that we're given tools, and that I can forecast tools that are coming down the pike that are going to be needed for us to be successful, and for us to have a team of people that can help them do that and do it within the rules and regulations of our bylaws and our constitution, and to give suggestions to such a talented pool of people that lead these committees and that are on the board. I'm here constantly researching and talking to other breed associations and seeing how they do it and what works and what doesn't, and then trying to help facilitate suggestions that we can make this not only successful for our members, but recognized amongst other breeds and association as a key breed that globally has a position that a lot of other people don't have.
You said something there that stood out to me. You said your position as EVP, you're not there to market other people's cattle. And I think so many people, they expect that the breed association is supposed to just sell their cattle for them. And that's not how it works. Like you said, you put the tools in place, give them the opportunity. But as far as getting the cattle marketed, falls heavily on kind of the shoulders of the people that own them. And so I couldn't agree more.
Well, and it's not my job to tell them they need to be, I think so much of what I'm hearing is, oh, they're show people or they're commercial people or they're this people, and we put them in a lane, but we don't realize that they're ABBA people. And at the end of the day, that's what I represent, is the ABBA and all those facets of people to give you the tools. So if you can recognize that the interesting part about people that go home and raise cattle is that they're their own CEO of their program. A lot of them work for other people, but they can make the decisions of what bulls they use, what cows they have, and what a beautiful thing to have the independence to do it. And so I think that it's not my job to squash their dream, but I want to give them tools to be successful at whatever that is, and information so they can make their decisions on how they need to go about promoting their cattle and recognize that everybody is important to it.
That's refreshing to hear, honestly, because you hear so many people, like you said, they categorize things. Those are show people, those are production people, they breed for maternal. But at the end of the day, you have a responsibility to all facets of people that are members of the ABBA to make sure that their voice is heard and that you're doing everything to be right by them, as far as, like you talked about before, the registry and the Constitution and in upholding those things. So you talked about there's show people, there's commercial focused kind of F1 production people. And so we talked about the show aspect of it in Houston and the magnitude that brings. But as far as helping the more commercially based Brahman breeder, the F1 breeder, what's your plans as far as just continuing to strengthen the F1 market going forward?
Well, I think that one of the things is having a key position here in the office that is dedicated, that is out there at facility at NCBA or BIF or at really commercially focused events. And I think that having a presence at those is important for us to be seen as a key player, not as the solution to everything, but a key component in the beef cattle equation. And so I think that's important to make sure we facilitate. And then also, I plan and have, I mean, I'm only one person and there's only a small staff here, but I think it's important to be at these events and to go out amongst our membership and see what's going on and see what we can do. I think we have to look at how composite cattle can collect performance data. I know other breeds have used that as a very aggressive platform in terms of registrations and collecting data on composite cattle as well. I think that's something we've got to look at. But I think there's a lot of opportunity and need and necessity to continue to grow that segment.
I agree, and I kind of appreciate your sentiment. We talked earlier about the strength of Brahman's international market, and do you have time and some finance allocated there at ABBA where you're going to get to do a little international travel?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, obviously, through different funds that are available are, I mean, there's so many opportunities to do that, and I see it being super important. It's something that I'm real big about budgets, and I'm real big about kind of having an idea. And as I get a little deeper into this and find the places that I think are important to go and that will be the most impactful in terms of using our dollars that way, I embrace that opportunity. And I think it's super important. And here's the other reason why. I think we're in this unique position that not all breeds have this global footprint. When you think about 50% of the composite cow population in the world being some derivative of Brahman or Brahman influence, it's pretty impressive. And I think that we need to think a little more globally. And we have the opportunity to do that for sure. And so whether that's going to farms, ranches, and events, it's definitely something I want to facilitate as we have a budget and have it approved I don't want to take it before the board and everybody to kind of know what I'm doing and to be pretty transparent. And I think that I don't want to weight everybody down with all the day-to-day activities, but I want everybody to know that I'm out there working equally to find a balance and an aggressiveness in terms of promoting this breed globally.
Awesome. Well, you talked about kind of where you see Brahman moving forward internationally, and we both know a lot of the strengths that Brahman bring to the table, even some of the weaknesses too. But what, I guess, if you had to explain to your listeners, or even if you had to tell the story to somebody that never had seen or been around a Brahman before, what do you think are the benefits of Brahman, and why are they special, and where do they fit on a global level in kind of the global beef market?
Well, and I think it's interesting to think about it from those two perspectives, Keaton, is that from someone that doesn't know anything at all, and then there's those that know everything and know more than me from a historical, and I love to learn from all of those. But yeah, I think it's the ability of the Brahman breed to adapt to environments is just exceptional. I think obviously, as you think about more tropical and being heat adapted, that's why they represent so much of the globe. Their mothering ability, I think, is super important and being a key component of that. And then also being able to perform and create hybrid vigor, oftentimes on poor forages. I think when you look at the conception of whether you believe in global warming or not, it is sometimes perceptions are a reality. And as we have more warming trends, maybe different regions of the United States experiencing more drought, and you see that these cows and this breed is performing in those, kind of makes you realize that we need to have them as a little bit of a component to what we're doing. If you think about it from a carcass merit, I think, stereotypically we're thought of as not having any carcass quality. But I think when you talk about red meat yield and the ability to do that at a level that a lot of people can't do, I mean, a lot of breeds cannot do, I think we do that quite well. I think also that the composition of not everything being driven off of a quality grid and more of a red meat yield grid, and how the word of quality is starting to change. And as we have more branded beef programs that are targeted not only to be quality driven, but if we can tap into those, I think that's important. So I think that there's just a world of future in the ability of Brahman to always be present commercially from a purebred sector and in all sectors of the globe where they fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And no breed is perfect, but I think the echo or the sentiment of Brahman cattle not being able to grade is kind of Brahmans of yesteryear. And we've seen
Agreed.
our
Agreed.
beef program has been very, very successful, and the amount of people that just come back talking about the flavor, the quality. I know England's down in the valley have been absolutely knocking it out of the park with their beef program. And so how do we go about fixing that perception, I guess, is the thing, because I don't think that the story they're telling is the truth. I think that the product is very much complementary to what you find from other breeds.
Well, I mean, I think that super challenging to do it, but it is, again, just changing the narrative. And I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier, and this was a little bit of my mindset as it targets on this is I remember sitting in class in a and being taught breeds and taught different things about cattle, and not being from a region where there were a lot of American influence cattle. And so you kind of just had the bullet points of they're great mothers, they're heat tolerant, enormous hybrid vigor, their disposition's not good, and they don't marble. And so I think that's something we're still teaching even at an advanced education level. And so I think that it's important to kind of maybe reach out and change that narrative in terms of like this. That's why I thought about the lecture series. It's like if I can just go and say, hey, this is where we're at today, to people that are going to be going out into job positions in their near future, and they're say, hey, that's not the perception of what today's modern Brahmin is. And I also think that it's going to take great communication and probably strategic campaigns to aggressively be out in front of people with the platforms that are available to us to tell our story.
And I agree. I think some of the things that are said are completely unfair because, like we talked about earlier, the education that so many people are basing these facts off of are studies that might have been done at Texas A&M in 1967 and
That's true.
5. And so how could you really judge something off of things that were done 50 years ago, I guess is always.
Well, and they were accurate then, but we've done a lot to, and every breed has. I think, it's interesting, and I'll give this as an analogy. It's like religion a little bit, and I don't want to talk religion or politics, but it's everybody has a perception of whatever religion is, whether you're Catholic, Baptist, Jewish, whatever it may be. But until you study it a little more, you're like, oh, it's not what I thought it was. And so I think that happens with breeds that, Red Angus are this way, Angus are that way, Brahmin are this way, Brangus are that way, and everybody has a stereotype without putting any educated research into them or asking questions. And I think all cattle have merit. I just want to make sure that we're a part of that equation.
Absolutely. We've talked about this in previous podcasts. Not every person everywhere on earth needs a Brahman cow, but
No,
a crossbreeding tool. I do think that even domestically, we're starting to see an expansion of the F1 cow, where you even are looking into states like Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee,
most definitely.
Carolinas, and I just see that continuing to grow. Like I talked about, not everybody needs a purebred Brahmin, but I think as we start to trickle Brahmin influence into kind of our crossbreeding system, we may be able to see just how far this could really go.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Keaton, is that it's like we have this line of the Gulf Coast states where these cattle work, and maybe as we go further north, it's a quarter blood or something, but they are there to get the positive components of growth and performance and red meat yield and mothering ability in a percentage. And I think as we can continue to make that grow domestically, I think that is something that's really important and a big goal of mine.
You talked about kind of office staffing going forward. And so what's kind of your at least 2025 game plan as far as I know you talked about expanding a new position, working in kind of some different directions from maybe what's been the norm there at the ABBA office. And so what's your plans with that going forward?
Well, I want to preface that it has to be approved by the board
Good point.
first,
Good
but
point.
I have a vision, and it also has to fit within a budget. So we can always have lots of wants, but if we have sometimes boundaries. But I do think the basic infrastructure and platform, and I want to give compliments to my current staff that is here working so hard at covering all of the bases. And I think sometimes people don't realize how thin sometimes you can get spread, and that you call and we're trying to make every one of you feel like your call was the only one we got when maybe we've had 50 in the queue for the day. So I do want to compliment those people that are here and that they do work hard and that they do an extremely good job. But as we go forward and we're kind of changing of the guard a little bit in some of those positions, I had mentioned briefly that the position that would be more commercial and research focused, and I think that needs to be their main target. I think there needs to be a person that can handle DNA and IT questions and know that forward and backward to help our membership and make them feel comfortable with what is going on. And then sometimes there is reasoning for things as we work with our different labs and work with all of those things. Like there is a reason that sometimes things get a little slower paced. And I know that we're in an era of everybody wanting a turnaround today, but sometimes that just doesn't happen and it has nothing to do with us. So I do see a person there, and then obviously membership and registrations, and then our junior youth is important, but I see that maybe being with a person that works with shows as well. And then a communications person that I think is key. We have a platform and a vision going forward of communicating to our membership through social media platforms, through our website, through e-blasts, through newsletters, through all of those things, and giving resources to our people to be more more efficient and more informed. So I know those are big goals, but hopefully we can get those put in place, and I think we can, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think if anybody was capable of it, you'd be. But like you talked about, just being more transparent, I think that's the biggest thing amongst membership is you just want to know what's going on. Even things are going to get slow at sometimes. When you throw in the new DNA requirements and the fact that we got to go through a third party to ultimately get these cattle registered at the end of the day, there's some challenges that come from that definitely don't fall on the shoulders of ABBA. And so I think if we could all just be maybe a little understanding as we work forward at figuring out how to kind of streamline this whole process.
I agree, and I mean I'm open to hearing, but if our membership can be patient and they know that the people here in the office are doing, like I said, are doing a great job and they're working diligently, and we have a great staff of interns that are helping us right now, and I want to reassure you that we're trying again to have a balanced approach of targeting all things to make sure we take care of the business of the ABBA. So I know it's always a word to be a little patient, but can't build Rome in 2 days. And I think there's also a good foundation here. I want to make sure that that is known. There's a good foundation in terms of our Constitution and the people that are here. I just think that my goal is we have to have some cohesiveness and understanding. We don't have to all like each other, but we all have to understand that we're trying to be Brahman breeders. And that I want it also to be, and I'll kind of maybe opening Pandora's box here, but is if I was a new breeder and I walked in here, I would want to be involved with the people and want to be involved and not see just diversity. And so I think unity is probably something that is super important.
Okay. I agree with a lot of things that you said there, Paul. As we start getting towards, and we're not wrapping up immediately, but as we start getting towards the end, I was just going to give you the opportunity. Is there anything that I missed or that you'd hope to talk about that we haven't got to? Points of emphasis that you think would be beneficial to toss in here?
I think we've covered a broad spectrum of things. I think a lot of these are visions and platforms I have, but I want everybody to know I put a lot of thought into them, and I'm continuing to research and listen. And I'm not one that goes into things hastily, but I'm also not one that lingers for too long because we have to take action on some things. So I want to be accessible to everybody, but within reason. And I'm trying to find, as I talked about, that balance and my work-life balance. My family is important to me. My work is important to me. The people I'm around are important to me. And I'm trying to find a balance in that too. And I always will.
I appreciate that. I guess as we get close to wrapping up, we always ask questions to our viewers like, what's your favorite Brahmin of all time? What's your pet peeve in Brahmin? I don't know if those questions really applicable for this conversation are safe to go ahead and get into, but I do think that we've gathered up quite a base of listeners that are Brahmin folks. And so if you could just hypothetically sit down with the entire membership and talk to them, what would you tell them?
Well, I think one of the things I do have a favorite Brahmin, and it'll probably surprise you, and I'll share that with you here in a second. I think one of the things I want the membership to know is that I am here to create some balance and to represent every entity. I want them to understand that, there can be one topic and three different opinions. And so not everybody's maybe happy with that opinion, but it has been well thought out and is going to be one that we go forward with for the good of the whole. And that I think this infrastructure of our Constitution, of our leaders in terms of our committees and our membership and basically the people that were involved and have been for a long time, that it's important to listen and then also to embrace our new members as well. So I just want them to know that I'm trying to do a balanced approach but also being aggressive and promoting their breed and giving them this toolbox that allows them to be successful at this breed.
I like that. Represent everybody in the way you said that, whether it's a person that's got 5 Brahmins or 500 Brahmins. At the end of the day, you represent everybody, and we need all of those people.
We need them all.
Going. We need the small breeder, the large breeder, the show breeder, the performance breeder, and you represent all those people. And so I really appreciate that. All right, I'm curious now about this favorite Brahmin. I really am. So tell us about.
So it maybe will surprise you. Obviously, I've judged lots of shows, and there's individuals that I've been super fond of in shows. But my favorite Brahmin is actually a steer, and he was a high percentage Brahmin. And it was when I was a kid, we would have We lived in New Mexico, so we're at a high altitude. It's cool in terms of temperature during the summers, great strength of grass, and so people would send us yearlings to grow out till they were going to go to the feed yard. My responsibility was always to be on horseback and ride through those cattle, make sure they were okay, mineral, check them. We had about 1,000 steers in a 5-section pasture, and there was my first exposure to a big old white Brahman floppy-eared steer. And so I kind of followed him all summer. And I had my dad, when we shipped those cattle, we weighed him individually. And he probably outperformed every calf that we had in there in that 1,000 head. And so that's my favorite Brahman because he kind of started my journey. And he also let me kind of realize how important that breed was.
Absolutely. Well, that's pretty good testimonial on Brahman there. And people don't forget that they do probably perform and have as much average daily gain in terms of feeding out and finishing as any breed. But that's really cool. Is there anything, Paul, like I already asked, have we missed anything? Is there anything you want to say as we wrap this up?
I'm sure there's something we've maybe missed, but like I said, I encourage you guys to be active. I know some people are apprehensive about doing so. I encourage you to attend events, and I encourage all of you to think broadly in terms of the importance of all of these sectors of the association. It may not be one you represent, but learning about them and learning about all of the importance that they have, that's my challenge, I guess, to the membership and the people that listen.
Well, I appreciate it, Paul. We'll go ahead and kind of close things off here, but if you would, tell your family, everybody here at BRC, and we look forward to continuing to grow a working relationship. Look forward to seeing you next week.
I appreciate it. Yeah, everybody, we'd love to see you at the World Congress. It's going to be a great event.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Paul. We'll go ahead and sign off.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cottrare. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.